Okay, welcome to the opening lecture for actually all my courses. And it's titled Leading Innovation, Building a New Kind of Engineer for the 21st Century. So I have a series of courses that I've developed for the University of Toronto. And first, the flagship course is APS 1012, which is Management of Innovation. The second one then followed was APS 1013, Applying Innovation, where we work with industry companies such as Celestica, Siemens, Messier Dowdy, Triumph. We work with many entrepreneurs through the George Brown College research initiatives that they have with the government. And there are many other companies, other automotive, aerospace, and so on. So the idea of APS 1013 is it's an applied course. Then the next course after that I developed was APS 1018, which is the history and philosophy of engineering. That's for the reflective engineer. So the first course, Management of Innovation, teaches the broad concepts of how you actually manage innovation and change. The second course is learning the techniques, the competencies to lead change and actually get real experience in real world companies. The third course is more for the reflective engineer. So we look at the history and philosophical reflection on what engineering is, and we start off in the medieval times and the impact of technology on culture. And we go to the modern times where how the engineering profession was organized, first in Britain, then in America and Canada. Then I created a fourth course, APS 1028, called Operations and Production Management. And that's a real hard, gritty course, which is really teaching engineers how to manage factory operations or service operations, any kind of operations where you have people, machines, technology, and processes, and the job is to make profit. You have inputs, you have outputs, and a transformation process in the middle. So this portfolio, and there are others, there's another course, MIE 459, fourth year undergraduate, or organizational design, and I'll add other courses to this portfolio, probably on subjects such as strategic management and manufacturing engineering, and perhaps enterprise resource planning, enterprise management systems for manufacturing specifically. The whole idea behind these courses, I want to create a new kind of engineer to lead change and lead innovation at the societal level, not just be stuck in cubicles doing calculations, not even just working as project engineers on technical projects, but to be it in senior executive, and the expectation is that they become senior executives in manufacturing companies or in service companies or indeed in the government. But essentially for engineers to work at the level where policy's made, what products should we design and build, what markets should we be in, how are we going to fund it, what is our financial expectations? So moving from thinking about thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, electromagnetism and so on, very worthwhile topics, I might add. Somebody has to do that stuff. But the thing is, many engineering methods and so on can be automated. So many of them will be automated. They're algorithms. And so while it's important that engineering undergraduate education focuses on the engineering sciences, graduate education really ought to be preparing, for those engineers that are not going to be technical, ought to be preparing engineers for management and leadership positions. And that's what all my courses are about. And this is sort of the introduction to my philosophy and what I'm trying to do. So the agenda for this presentation: set the stage, engineers as leaders. Define what innovation is, for example. Define why the role needs to change from being sort of technical servants to the corporate system, to being leaders and drivers of policy and change in society. And then I'll talk about what I'm doing about it and so on. So the idea is to course portfolio objectives, is to design, build, manage, and transform an enterprise. So the idea is that to teach you the ability to build your enterprise or acquire an enterprise and transform it, or join an enterprise as an employee and transform it, or be hired as a consultant by the CEO or the vice president and transform it or a piece of it. So innovation basically is art. So it's not just science, and that's why I feel that engineering education has gone far too far toward the engineering sciences and mathematics. Very worthwhile subjects, but enough's enough after 4 years. And so to the true innovation, the true art of engineering innovation, for example, is an art. It's an art to manage people, it's an art to manage and build the processes, and it's an art to manage the politics, using scientific principles, of course, of process management, organizational design, and so on. So, again, I talked about applying skills with real-world partners, and it's to create a reflective engineer to try to get meaning. My goal is that engineers don't waken up at the age of 50 or 55 or 60 or worse 65 or worse even again 70 and say, oh my God, what did I do with my career? I was stuck in the one company all my life, you know, doing calculations. Again, for those that want to do that, I don't it's fine. But I don't want you to regret doing that after 30 or 40 years, sitting in the same cubicle or the same office. So the likelihood of that happening in the 21st century is remote. There's no really employment for life any longer. But that said, it's the principle of being in a position where you get 1 year's experience and you repeat it 30 times. I want to create engineers that are constantly learning, constantly reflecting, constantly questioning what they're doing, and try to make change for the good. Try to have a higher purpose for your career, which industry it's in. So if you want to work in the pharmaceutical industry, question the end use of the drugs. If you work in the aerospace and defense industry, how are these weapon systems being used? If you work in civil engineering, you know, be thoughtful how what you're doing affects nature around you, the ecological system, if you're going to put a road through a forest or whatever it happens to be. I know that these things are being taught, but I'm looking for like a holistic approach right from the word go, where engineers change their entire thinking. And also, purpose for my courses is to teach strategic thinking. What is strategic? Well, what's the long-term impact, 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years, 100 years into the future of the effort of the work that we're doing? Don't just think a year out. Don't just think about what's the immediate payback for this effort this work that I'm doing. What's the impact to myself, my family, to my local community, to my city, to the country, to the province, and in fact to the globe. So all levels of thought regarding strategic intent. The other thing is strategic change and innovation can be engineered. Engineering itself, I don't see engineering as mechanical, electrical, civil, electronic, aeronautical, and so on, production, manufacturing. I see it as a systematic way of thinking. Engineering, and I came through a very rigorous 5-year apprenticeship program before I got my engineering degree, and it was so rigorous that it impacted how I actually think about getting things done. And I think of engineering in many ways as the philosophy of action. So, or innovation is the philosophy of action. You think of philosophy as fixed laws, where action is about change. And so change, the ancient Greeks would have said anything that's changing is not science, because it's not predictable, you see. And if it's not predictable, it's not science. And if it's not science, it's not knowledge. Well, of course, nothing could be further from the truth. I challenge that. I'm challenging that big time. And I'm saying that the metaphysics, ethics, logic, mathematics, all these areas of original knowledge, and eventually the sciences, physics, chemistry, and so on, biology, etc. I'm saying that the change, managing change itself, is a deep body of knowledge, and there's a philosophy behind that also, and engineering is involved in that endeavor. Engineering sits, and we'll talk about it more as we go through this presentation, engineering sits between both the arts and humanities and business and the sciences. It's like the bridge between them, it links them. So it impacts society by using scientific principles. And so if the engineer wants to actually engage in a harmonious way between science and society, which includes arts, humanities, and so on, then one has to broaden one's view of the world and skills and competencies and be able to engage in each of these camps. So the other thing is to design organizations. Actually, so to engineer it is to make it happen in a systematic way, to bring a change in, whether it's building a transportation system, a satellite system, an energy system, manufacturing system, it's all systems. Then we have to design it. So I want to also include design thinking, teach design thinking. So if you're going to design a physical product, we can use the same principles to design a social system, a socio-technical system, a system that involves technology and social issues. Excuse me. Then we have the whole concept of ethics. So in the APS 1018, there's the ethics, and by ethics I don't mean trying to get away with a mechanical or a physical design using cheap materials. I'm talking about ethical systems dealing with society at the societal level, the impact of food that we design and manufacture on health, the impact of weapon systems and drones on personal security, as well as surveillance systems and so on our privacy issues. The concept of the technology that enables a police state. So I want engineers to be cognizant of those issues. So what is it all about? Engineers, if we're going to manage change and be strong, look at the whole idea is that change can destroy people. When people that are exposed to change can be overwhelmed, can implode, lose their jobs, have nervous breakdowns, etc. So whether we like it or not, innovation means change. Bringing new ideas to market, commercializing them means change. And I'll also say right at this stage, innovation is not research and development. Research and development is a piece of innovation, probably the first 5%, if that. So when you hear research people saying, I'm going to do innovation, no, it's not. It's research and development, it's discovery. And then innovation really starts when you take that to market and you commercialize it, sustain it, build an enterprise to sustain it, fund it, that it's self-sustaining, that it can fund itself. There's an economic equation, there's an economic measurement. So innovation really starts when research and development is part of it, but you'll find out in APS 102 about the concept of S-curves. And as we go up the S-curve, that's when the product that we're bringing to market, or the service we're bringing to market, or the ideas that we're bringing to market, the business model matures and grows. And that growth path is typically growth in the marketplace and money, making money. Engineering profession itself, I'm calling for a change in the engineering profession. In 1910, and look this up on the internet, a fellow called Flexner in the United States created a report called the Flexner Report, and that report transformed medicine in the United States of America. Medicine itself became a formalized profession, and the medical profession we have today in the United States, Britain and Canada and probably other countries, most of it is a result of that. The status of doctors went through the roof as a result of this report and as a result of this study, where you see the doctors now have a very powerful lobby with government bodies, both in the United States, Canada and in Britain. So it transformed medical practice, it enhanced its status and its role in society. I think the same thing needs to happen for engineering, because I think the role of the engineering society, especially in Canada, has been, while it's very high status, it's still seen in the narrow technical domain. I don't think the engineers are go-to people by the government, for example, when it comes to energy policy. But when it comes to actually implementing the plants, the generating stations, the power distribution and generation, we go to the engineers then. But who decides what, should we spend $100 million on windmills or wind turbines, or should we spend, or solar energy? Where are the engineers who actually understand how these systems work, understand the economics of the system? Where are they when it comes to actually setting policy? This is really the areas that I'd like to focus on. And then, of course, the other area of policies, how do we create wealth? Well, wealth is actually created from manufacturing. The infrastructure enables, communication, transportation, and so on. The healthcare keeps our people healthy, the food system, but true wealth is created through manufacturing and exporting. It's the wealth creation sector. It's not a coincidence that Britain, its empire was built on its manufacturing capability after the Industrial Revolution. It's not a coincidence that the United States became the most powerful country in the world because it crammed 50% of the world's manufacturing by the 1960s. It's not a coincidence that Japan's miracle happened. Of course, they're in trouble now, but Japan's miracle happened as a result of its manufacturing prowess. And today, China, which this is the United States debt from zero, minus 16 to 18, 20 trillion. That's just its government. But if you add in everybody's debt, it's like 60 to 70 trillion dollars. And China is the opposite. It has a surplus of that amount. So why manufacturing? It's wealth creation. It's not difficult to actually understand this, but why is government policy not thinking about these issues in a practical way? Well, a lot of it's to do with the absence of the know-how. The know-how, what takes a manufacturing system to work, for example. And putting in, of course, regulations, putting in economic systems that foster the entrepreneurs to actually build a manufacturing plant, to sustain it, to pay taxes, to pay high wages, etc. So capitalism will go to the place where it gets the most profit and the least amount of expenses. So if it's low-tech products that are going to be built by low-tech workers in the Far East, in Asia or wherever, they'll go there. But what about the very sophisticated advanced technology systems that's going to require very highly educated engineers, bachelor's, master's, PhDs, and so on, specialized skills? What are we doing to create wealth with those kinds of people? So all these issues you will face in the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years. And to face and to manage those issues, you have to have the mental capability to actually deal with them. And that's the purpose of most of my courses. Let me say to you, it's not new. There have been many reports, especially in the UK and the United States, about the call for the transformation of the engineering profession. Here's Engineer 2020. It was the National Academy of Engineering, 2004. This is 2008. It was the Engineer for a Changing World. It was the Engineer of 2030. Professor Duderstadt of the University of Michigan. This was 2008. Outstanding piece of work. But again, they're just pieces of paper. This is Engineer 2030, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, 2013. Engineering UK, this is Engineering Council UK. Again, University of Engineering, Engineering the Future. Turning Ideas, tons of, that's size, by the way, and there's many more than this. Bottom line is there's lots of research, lots of studies, lots of talk by various learned societies and institutions and so on, but very little gets really done. It's moving at, the change of engineers is moving at a snail's pace. Engineers, for example, in the UK, have the most terrible image and status because the term is used to describe all the trades, the people like auto mechanics, plumbers, people that fix your toilet, people that put an aerial on your roof are called satellite engineers. People that come and hook your internet up in the house are called, electrical engineers or telecommunications or internet engineers and so on. And people that fix your washing machine or washing machine engineers, TV engineers, the list goes on. So the word engineer among the masses in the UK is seen as a low-tech or a sort of semi-skilled trade job, but where the chartered engineers there have 10 to 12 years university and post-university experience, bachelor's, master's, and 4 or 5 years monitored experience. But it's just not known in society. So how you socially construct engineering as a profession is very important. In Canada, it's a licensed profession. It's very different. In Britain, it's based on your title, based on education. In Canada, it's a license to practice. So you actually can't call yourself an engineer in Canada unless you have a professional engineering license. And if you don't have it, you can't actually practice, and you can't call yourself an engineer and practice against the law. where in Britain everybody and their brother can call themselves an engineer. So it has served to create a high status for engineers in Canada, but at a technical level where the chartered engineers in Britain will be perceived even higher, you know, by those that know in industry that it is considered a very highly advanced qualification, but the masses don't know about it. So socially constructing engineering matters. How it's communicated to society and how the role of the engineer in society is communicated matters. So these reports have been produced since the 1990s, since the 1960s actually in the UK, and even in the United States back in the 1920s. We'll find in my history and philosophy course, there was a call for reform for engineers. There's one book you should look up called The Revolt of the Engineers, set in that period, which was to make engineers rise up and take on a more of a role at the societal level, but it didn't work for various reasons. Many times employers don't want that. They don't want strong engineers. They want engineers to be employees stuck in the cubicles. So the whole idea is to raise the awareness of the role of the engineer in society. Stanford University just recently published a paper how they're going to organize their future activities. So they want to create synergy between humans and engineered systems, so socio-technical systems. They want to engineer living matter, so organic, you know, genetic engineering. They want to create security for everything, so security for your cell phone, security of you know, surveillance systems and so on. I haven't got into the depth of what their end goal is, but you ought to look at what the end goal is, because the end goal of each of these better have moral purposes that you actually would agree with. So if they're going to engineer living matter, are they going to make cyborgs? Are we going to have robots with and humans like in the movies? Is that going to happen? Is that going to be new soldiers? Do you want a society like that? These are the questions you're going to have to deal with. Affordable energy systems, using autonomy, enable futures engineering systems, autonomous engineering systems, systems that can work on their own without human intervention, sustaining exponential IT performance, you know, artificial intelligence essentially, intelligent systems, engineer matter from atomic to the micro, so nanotechnology, flourishing cities of the future, so designing cities to avoid congestion, avoid pollution. I mean, what a great city like Toronto, GTA, 7.1 thousand square kilometers. It's headed to 11 million people. Well, at least in the Golden Horseshoe area. Right now we're at 6.5 to 7 million. If you add the Golden Horseshoe, 11, it could be up to 13 million. But how are we going to move all those people and manage all those people? And then big data analysis to drive engineering, big data, and of course affordable healthcare. This is what Stanford has said are their big future issues. What are yours? This is what I'm really getting at here. What are your issues you want to work on for the future? Okay. So let's look at what innovation is. So there's, and again, I get into this in much greater depth in APS 101 but there's basically 4 kinds of innovation. There's innovation radical, which destroys the technology, so it supersedes the previous technology. So the DVD is history now, since we've had downloaded internet. And the DVD replaced other mediums and tape decks and so on. So that's the technology, and of course it also destroys the market. So the stores where you rented your videotapes and so on, they all went, that was a market for that, gone. So if your career was selling and renting out, and your company rented out videos, that was history because of the internet, because of downloading. So that's just a sort of recent example, but there's many examples, and I have a whole list of professions and occupations that were superseded over the last 100 years. So if you were to go back to the early 1900s, or especially in the 1800s, blacksmiths was a big position, and also guys that fixed your horse's hooves and so on. They're all gone, obviously because of the car. Eventually, auto mechanics That's going to be a history. People fixing internal combustion engines and so on, it's going to be gone eventually with the battery-operated cars. So innovation, and that's what it's about, doesn't stop. It radically changes. Where you've radical transformation when you disrupt both the technology and the market. Incremental here is where you're just incrementally, you're sustaining the current operation, so you're still in the same market, but you're competing with your competitors by making incremental changes to the technology. So the technology, you may have an aircraft and you've got two competitors like Airbus and Boeing. So each of them incrementally improve and change their product just to stay ahead. Neither of them have created some kind of transportation system that actually gets rid of the aircraft as a transportation device. So we're not quite at Star Trek where we beam someone up or we beam someone from Toronto to London, which would instantly render the aircraft redundant, because if we can beam and transform matter from one location to another, that makes the aircraft redundant. Sounds far-fetched and silly. Not in Star Trek, not in 2030, whatever it is, or 2300. So, change is not going to stop. As humans, from being in the cave, will always find efficient ways to do things. What you want to be careful with is that you have a moral code while you make that change, unless you want to engage in wars and aggro and so on. So disruptive change, so there's disruptive innovation on both sides here. One is where you disrupt the market. So it's the same, you're not disrupting the technology, but you've created some feature in the technology that you've gone into a new market, and your probably process innovation has brought the costs down. The technology is the same, but your cost to design and build it or to get it to market, you're a disruptor. You put other people out of business because perhaps you have better customer service. People want to buy from you because they actually like dealing with you. They like the quality of your product. Like the Japanese, they didn't disrupt the cars. Cars were still in place, but they disrupted the market. The United States was 55% of the world car market in the 60s or early 70s, I think 60s. And by the 80s, Toyota became, or the 90s, Toyota became the #1 company in the world, automotive company in the world. I think the United States is now like 16% of the market. That's called disruption of the marketplace. And similarly, the PC computer disrupted the mainframe computer as a technology, actually, but it also changed the marketplace fundamentally. Now, of course, Netflix is another great disruptor of the DVD stores and so on. Okay. Now, with any innovation and any change comes risk. So the bigger, the more radical the innovation, the higher the risk, but the higher the reward. So if you're going to spend a lot of money on a new product that could disrupt the marketplace, it's going to cost a lot of money, and it could not work. It may not work. You may not prove it. People may not go for it. The market conditions might change. Sentiments might change. Values might change. So you've got to realize that with innovation, there's risk. If you're just doing incremental innovation where it's customer experience, where you just want to save the customer money, so improve your processes, maybe reduce the cost of materials, maybe do some outsourcing for components overseas and so on to reduce your cost. That would be called incremental innovation, and there's less risk with that. So you're still managing within an existing market here. Over here, you're managing within an existing market, but you're improving the technology. So you have high risk, but it's more of a defensive strategy, meaning you're going to stick within the market that you know. You're not going to go to a market that you know nothing about. So you're not going to enter the Asian market. You're going to stick in the North American market. It's proven. So you're choosing to create that defensive strategy. We'll take our technology, we'll prove it there, at least for a few years, 5 years, before we actually try to enter other markets. Because there's a cost with entering new markets. There's a cost of setting up overseas operations. There's a cost for hiring all these people, and promotions and marketing and advertising and all the rest of it to try to create awareness of your product. And similarly, so above this line is the new market, below it is existing market. to the left of the vertical line is the minimal technology change, and then this is radical. So when you get radical technology, a new market, high risk but very, very high reward, just like when Steve Jobs brought in the Apple PC, of course, they completely changed the whole marketplace. There was very high risk as well, and there's high risk with bringing in these new products. There's been a whole recent, I think it's Samsung, I forget which companies it was, but there's been, you just look at the cell phone marketplace. There's BlackBerry and all, not completely destroyed, but not far off it, by the iPhone and so on. And then as I'm making this video, even the iPhone itself, iPhone 6 or 6 I think it is under review as perhaps not performing the way they thought it would. So innovation is all about change and managing risk. So there's so that's the positioning of innovation. Now the types of innovation, you get product innovation and service. So product, new aircraft, new car, new iPhone, wearable technologies. There's the latest is the new watch coming out from Apple. And then there's new services, the ATM, for the automatic teller system. Instead of queuing up in the bank, you can go to the teller 24/7 to do your banking. These were great. That's a technology, by the way. That's a product innovation that also enhanced the service side of it, where customers could be serviced 24/7. And then there's business processes, operational innovation that improves the effectiveness by which you design your products, you manufacture them, and you support them in the field. So business processes to design, to build and support, and also business processes to acquire business. How do you sell? How do you close the sale? There's a whole science to selling. I took the Xerox selling system many years ago. It was a whole methodology for selling. I recommend all engineers learn that. Learn the science of selling. How you close a sale, how you ask questions, open probe questions, close probe questions. It's all been codified, just like your dynamic systems or statics and dynamics, the equations of it, moments of inertia, etc. Those same principles apply in these human systems as well, that are repetitive. So business model is all about competitive positioning, identifying, working within regulatory requirements, but changing your business model on how you position yourself in the marketplace. So, for example, something that's close to our hearts here, most people would be used to coming into classes to get their university education, their degrees. Of course, what we're doing now, this online system and online learning, is a new business model. Universities are businesses. They're there to make money in the capitalist society. When I actually went to university, I went to the public university system in the UK, and quite frankly, profit wasn't really the name of the game in those days. It was truly there for the purity of education and to sustain and meet the budgets set by the government. But the government funded it along with grants and so on. Some students would pay, but most would get scholarships, because at that time only 5% of the population actually went on to get a degree or to do degree level work, only 5%. Now with 50%, the system's completely changed. The business models change. Universities to become profit machines in many ways, especially in the United States, the private universities. But in Britain, it's still considered any extra money is called a surplus, it's not called a profit. But they're much more sensitive now with respect to money making. That's why overseas students pay double to treble what the home students pay. That's why professors' salaries have gone through the roof in Western countries. Not mine, by the way, because I work part-time. I am not employed by the university, though I am a formal professor of innovation. I still have run my own business and stay in the practical side of the work and teach on a part-time basis. So one of the other big areas of change is to manage social change. So what have engineers got to do with social? Well, every product an engineer makes impacts society in some way, impacts the social system. So if you're going to put a bridge from one location across to another, you're connecting people. Well, if those people actually don't like each other, if there's a ghettoization of a particular community based on race, based on religion, based on nationality, whatever, in a city, and you decide to build a bridge which would connect them, or a road which would connect the two communities, you may have all kinds of upheaval. You may also, maybe you have a good purpose for doing it, but the social impact has to be thought through. What is the social impact of bringing in a new technology like a road, a bridge? So, no matter what engineers do, they're impacting society, they're impacting at the national level, the country level, or at the provincial level, at the city level. They're impacting population growth and so on. This is the whole concept of the S-curves. S-curves can be used to show the changes in technology, but they can also be showed to see the growth in whole market sectors. So here we have examples of various industry groups. From the early 18th century, the growth of textiles peaked in the 1880s or 1850s to the 1880s. And basically, if you looked at Britain, this is the way it went, and then declined after that. Of course, a lot of that textile machinery was then sent to India, Pakistan. The railroads peaked around the 1913s. In the 1850s, there were railroads. If you went to Britain, there were railroads all over the place. In the most awkward locations, there were railways to the little remote villages all throughout the British Isles. And we see them today. They're now often beautiful places to walk through, you know, but they were built in the 1850s when railways were peaking. And all these industries go through a rise and a steady state, and then some of them do collapse and fall. Many of them, you know, move on to other industries. So the railroads, of course, are still around, but they were huge growth from 1825 to the 1913 and so on. Probably this is more in the United States. So not only do industries have different characteristics and within a particular economy, like United States, for example, but they will have a different growth path in other countries like the UK or Canada or China. So if you were to plot the development of railways in China, I'm going to suggest probably the levitation, the high-speed trains is a big feature of China, which is not at all used in the United States. So if you were just to plot trains in China and high speed, you'll find there's been a huge growth probably from I'm going to suggest the 1970s, 1980s onwards. And of course these developments came out of France and Germany, who really, and French particularly, have a lot of high-speed trains. The British are just putting their first one from London to Glasgow and still hasn't, and, you know, we're well into the 21st century and the British are just getting around to doing this. So, you know, we have all these different industry innovations and industry sector changes, but they don't necessarily correlate from country to country. Automobiles, you know, they say there's a peak around the 1980s. The industry, aeronautics, this is really to do with innovation, by the way, as well. The automobile hasn't changed much. So what are we getting into next? This is really what this should say here is the automobile based on the internal combustion engine. So we're going to see another S-curve here, the automobile based on the battery, so, or solar. But that would be a technology change that will impact the industry, and so on. And the next big wave, they say, is nanotechnology, which should peak around 2080. You'd have to talk to futurists as to why they say then. But there seems to be a correlation here of like 100 years, if you just look at these. So the future, also biotechnology, so bioengineering, medical engineering, and nanotechnology, a convergence between the two. So we've been able to manipulate matter at the molecular, the 10 to the minus 6, 10 to the minus 9 level, plus the ability to work with human organic systems and manipulate the human genes, the human, not the genes, but the genes and how they work together. This whole area is a growth area for the future. Here's an example of an S-curve for pretty much an engineered product. So first, it's a new product. So over here, there's been some kind of research. Well, I'm just noticing you can't see the cursor. But over here, there's research just back here, and it comes out and it's been proven to be a new product. So the idea then is to make the product, make it work properly, maximize its efficiency, maximize the reliability. So this is what we're doing. We are improving how products perform, reduce cost, and improve quality. And that's really the essence of an S-curve for a particular product or a technology. And then under that's the technology. So here's an example of underlying technology. So you have product S-curves, you have industry sector or S-curves, and you've even civilization S-curves. The Roman Empire had a steady state period of development, rise, peaking, and then collapsing, replaced by Islam after the 5th century. It began to rise, and by the 15th century it peaked, declined. That was then the rise for Western Europe, particularly then in the 17th century, 18th century, Britain, great rise, and then of course eventual collapse. I mean, essentially the British Empire did collapse. It's still a Commonwealth of Nations, did a pretty good job of maintaining that relationship. But as a world power, of course, it's down in number 5, 6, 7 and falling. So S-curves for technology. So here's an example here of technology field. So this is electronic computers. This is basically computers. So we started out with vacuum tubes. Then from there we went to transistors. Then from there to integrated circuits. And then from there to very large scale integration and so on. So technology progress from size, weight, operational speed. So the measures of innovation is, can we reduce the weight? Can we reduce the size and get the same impact? Can we increase the speed by which information moves, or by which a train travels, or by which an airplane travels without jeopardizing safety and so on? So that's the technology S-curve. Now, technology S-curves impacts the product. So what's the product? It's all about market growth, the number of sales, units installed, etc. So here's where the engineers are developing the technology field, and here's where they actually apply it into a product. So computers and electronic systems were first used in the military. Many things are first used in the military, obviously to give a competitive advantage in terms of national security. What's the military used? It's often used for defense, but it's often used to conquer countries to get their markets. The British Empire was built on that, to open up markets for tea, tobacco, all these different products that prevailed at the time of the development of the British Empire. So many innovations do start off with the military. Then they move into industry as they become commercialized, so the society itself can create wealth. And then they eventually get into the home. So the technology, the PC is a good example, gets into the home, and then a portable computer. So that's what this is talking about. So you have big, large scale computers. You see them on the 1960s movies. The whole room was filled with them in the James Bond movies and Dr. No and so on, where they had big mainframe computers. Of course, now we all have our little portable computers with the same power as those huge IBM computers from the 1960s. So we're dealing with technical approaches that were on the technology, and here we're dealing with market. And then, of course, whole industries evolve. So this one's the IT industry, from automation and efficiencies, you know, from the 50s and 60s. So putting the computer onto the numerical control machine tools in manufacturing, that was a big breakthrough, and started off at MIT in 1948. And by the 1960s, there were machine tools all over the Western world that were computer controlled, numerical control. And then from just doing some automation and also making MRP systems, software for inventory control, for shop floor control, and so on. So automating individual components of the business. Then productivity and end user empowerment, where the user themselves could configure the software, could actually engage in taking control of the software that was driving the processes and reconfiguring it themselves. And then value creation, business effectiveness, where you look at the whole business system and create these large-scale ERP systems or computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing systems that are completely integrated, so that when you make a change in the product design, it also changes the formula, the algorithm to make the manufacturing process, and it's all automated. And up here, as we continue, you're going to find artificial intelligence and expert systems are becoming far more prevalent and embedded in everyday life. So this one here is it's really about population growth, and it's basically saying, look, since minus 9,000, when sort of the first agricultural revolution, when we were really looking at, you know, innovation in a more systematic way, 9,000 BC is before Christ, or before Common Era, BCE. We went through, you know, the plough irrigations, the first cities, minus 4,000, probably around Mesopotamia and so on, and then Egypt. Metallurgy, form of metal, you know, working. Then writing only came around minus 3,000 years, the ability to actually write and share ideas and systemize. Mathematics, minus 2,000. The Greeks in around, you know, 600 BC, before that, the Greeks really put big emphasis on mathematics. You know, Pythagoras' theorem, there's many other formulas where the Greeks really took mathematics to another level. Then when we get to here, again, at the time of, I mean, in the Christian calendar, it was when Christ was born, or died, or born actually. Greece had peaked just before that, and the new power became Rome. And Rome lasted about 800 years. It sort of declined around about the 5th century, the 400s, as its empire stretched. It's the peak of the end of its empire was at Hadrian's Wall in the north part of England, south of the area it's now known as Scotland, but in those days was known as Pictland, the Picts. And that was the level of which the Roman Empire sort of, that was its end, because it was basically exhausted by that time. It could no longer afford to send legions up into the Highlands or up into Scotland, or into Pictland as it was called, because it had reached its capability to project its power. And of course that was also to do with technology as well, because what gave it its power was its roads, its Roman roads, its bridges, its technology, its weapon systems, its way it organized its military, its organizational structure of its centurions, and its hierarchy of soldiers, and its ability to motivate its soldiers, to reward its soldiers by giving them land and so on, and to feed its soldiers, to get the food to the battlefield without having too much disease and so on when you have 100,000 soldiers encamped in far off lands. So behind the Roman military was a lot of engineering know-how. And then there was the Black Death in Europe, where 50% of the population was died, and I think it was all to do with rats. And it happened in London as well, London, England, huge amount of death. But look what happened here in around about the 1600s, 1700s. The Industrial Revolution basically happened here, 1700s. This is the second agriculture, Watt's engine, the steam engine, which begat the internal combustion engine and the railroads, germ theory, telephone electrification, the automobile, penicillin, all these technology developments. Look at the population. This is an old chart. I might have had it 6 million. We're now at about 8 billion. Where is it going to end? It will cause big problems, these refugee problems all over the world, the fact that 2 billion people are living in poverty. There's going to be big social implications. So what you do as engineers with technology and so on has a huge impact on the civilization. The profession needs to change to manage complex change. Complex change is energy systems, how you generate the energy, how you distribute the energy, how it costs, which different kinds of energy should you choose. These are complex systems. Now, engineering is a discontented profession, especially in Anglo-Saxon. Again, in Britain, this is the image of the engineer with the wrench, and they call it a spanner. So the guy here with the wrench, if the BBC, if you look at the BBC website and they're talking about the engineering profession, you're going to see a guy with a wrench and a pair of overalls, meaning, dungarees are also called. And they're seen as maintenance people. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. It's like depicting a doctor as the person that comes in and cleans up the operating room after the operation has been performed. But that's the way engineering has been mislabeled, particularly in Anglo-Saxon countries. Britain is a bad case. It's not so much in Canada or in the United States. It's certainly not this way in Germany and France, where engineers are highly respected and go-to people, and in China and India as well, and the Middle East. But one of the things that I contend is that engineering has drifted far much toward this mathematics. So up until the 1970s, engineers in the UK were trained through apprenticeship, long 5-year apprenticeships, where you attended technical college 1 day and 2 evenings per week, 4 or 5 years, before you got fully qualified. It wasn't the academic education was typically not at the degree level because it didn't have as much of the mathematics and so on. But it was certainly enough to create engineers that could design and build aircraft, that could design and build bridges and so on. But as technologies become far more complex, then it was a real requirement where engineers needed to have degrees, no question about it, especially after the space shuttle as well. Not the space shuttle, the Apollo moon landing, which was basically a huge science, it's an engineering endeavor, but it was enabled by scientific bodies of knowledge in order to project, flight paths and assure that the rockets would work and so on. It's called rocket science. Of course, rocket science is simply nothing about science. Science is a component, but it's engineering. It's aerospace engineering. Rocket science is aerospace engineering. So when people say it's not rocket science, they really mean it's not aerospace engineering or rocket engineering. But essentially, engineering education has drifted to a great extent toward the sciences. I say far too much. We need to go back to that practical apprenticeship as well as the theory and create an engineer. It's an 8-year program, probably most likely 10, to create a fully rounded professional engineer. And there's the story about engineers. It's boring. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Engineering is one of the most exciting professions with so much opportunities and so many fields one can get into. It's unbelievable. But typically people deeply educated in intense mathematics and so on tend to be inward, tend to be introvert characters, and so tend to be somewhat shy. These are generalities, but if you look at the characteristics of engineers, guys with their pencils and their shirts and so on, typical nerd image, Dilbert and so on, you'll find that this concept of the general public thinking of engineering and engineering is boring. It's an image issue and has to be addressed. So engineers as technocrats, they focus on things. So this is the image of an engineer with a gear wheel, and this is from the 1950s where they're all lined up doing their drawings and so on. I wasn't quite and certainly wasn't around in those days, but I was actually there during the transition from the drawing board to the CAD system, and I actually pretty much built a great expertise on CAD-AM, C-A-D-A-M, which was originally developed by Lockheed, but marketed and sold by IBM, and I actually used it at IBM. Was one of the first in Canada when I just arrived in the country to actually use CAD-AM. So I went from being on the drawing board, I knew what that was like, beautiful printing and so on, to working on CAD systems. And I did it for the CAD system for about 3 years, and then eventually left it and never went back. And I wouldn't even know the first thing about going on, for example, AutoCAD or Inventor or any of these systems. I know the algorithms, I know how they work, but I wouldn't know how to manipulate them any longer, because I chose in my, I think it was mid to late 20s, to leave technical behind and focus totally on management systems. So again, people are focused, engineers tend to these cubicles and so on. So I'm going to stop here. This is the end of part 1.